Excuse me, Your Worship, you're live.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'll just wait till we click over 5 p.m. here and we'll get going. There are the bells of Town Hall Clock Tower now. All right, Council, it's 5 p.m. and I will call this meeting to order. And I'll start by reading the land acknowledgement. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who cared for their families and communities the way we now seek to care for ours. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and respects all of the nation-to-nation agreements that have formed relationships with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We seek to do better and the reality of our shared history, the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community, and we seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better, to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community nation to nation. We'll now table the motion for the adoption of the agenda, and the motion reads that the content of the council agenda for October 18, 2021 be adopted as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Doherty. I see 2 cards up. I'll start with the Deputy Mayor and then Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. For my colleagues around the table, staff, and those who are perhaps watching at home this afternoon, it's my intention under number 10 motions that I will withdraw 10.1, which is the motion specific to the County of Simcoe and waste collection. But I'm going to speak to it perhaps under other business or even under the county report. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So noted. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. I apologize for my appearance in this Zoom meeting. I'm having some technical difficulties with my personal computer. I would like to request that we move an item that is on the agenda because we have received from a member a notice of motion, which has to do with vaccines. And we have in the agenda from the Corporate and Community Services meeting also a report regarding vaccines. And I wonder if there's a way that we can move that report to item 12 in our agenda so that we can deal with the 2 of them together because I believe they are related. And I believe that there's room for some discussion to be had regarding both of those items.
All right, I have that request. And my understanding is that we can move the item unless there are any objections from council to doing that. Are there any objections, council? Seeing none, then go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just so where it's appropriate to have the conversation, I'd like to sever the discussion on the delegated authority, please. So that may still be able to appear up top rather than going down to number 12. I'm not sure.
You know what, we'll delegated authority under, we'll have to.
It's under the same vaccination report.
Specifically, delegation authority for administration policies. I'm going to look to staff for comment on that. Can we safely sever that and discuss it under the report from the standing committee, or would it be make sense to keep them together? I mean, we certainly can sever them at the time when the report is discussed, Councillor. I guess I'm just wondering if severing it and leaving it individually as part of the CorpCom standing committee report versus dealing with it in the context of the motion to deal with it.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I'm okay with them both happening down in number 12. I just didn't want to miss my opportunity. And when we got to 12, someone say, well, you can't do that.
So noted. And I don't think, I'll look to the clerk, but I don't think that should prevent any discussion. No. Okay. All right. So with those 2 amendments, The motion will now read for the adoption of the agenda as amended. And that was moved and seconded already. I just looked to the mover and seconder to make sure they're comfortable with that. All right, I'm seeing a nodding of heads. I'll call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item is the adoption of the minutes, and the motion reads that the minutes of the regular council meeting held September 27, 2021 be approved as presented. Get a mover and a seconder for that, please, council. Councillor Doherty and Councillor Hamlin. Any omissions or corrections, council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Is there any business arising from the previous minutes, council? Seeing none, and that brings us to community announcements, and I will start with the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, through you to my colleagues, staff, and to the public. Two things I'd just like to speak to. The first is one that has gotten some well-deserved media attention in the past week, and it's in recognition posthumously of the late Ed Christie, and an award that he received. The award specifically was the Jan Hawley Memorial Pinnacle Award, and this award was presented, as I say, posthumously to Mr. Christie at the most recent Ontario BIA Association annual conference, which was held in Hamilton, Ontario. Chair Conning, Dave Conning, and Ed's son, Michael Christie, were able to attend and accept the award on his behalf. And I'll just read the brief description, and that is that this award recognizes individuals who are accomplished leaders and have demonstrated skills in advocacy, innovation, and community building in their own organizations and within the BIA movement at large. Ed was a founding member of the Collingwood Downtown Business Improvement Area in 1977 and continued as a business champion in the downtown throughout the years. I think that many know the store and the legacy that Mr. Christie has provided not only here in Ontario, but the BIA district and the Heritage District. He was not only a champion for the BIA, but was a champion for heritage and heritage conservation. And his legacies, although they do not own the building, which they did, I think that the building is perhaps one of our icons and jewels within the downtown, and a cherished asset that we all enjoy today. There are few photos of our town hall that don't capture the Christie building within the backdrop. The second I would like to mention, it's not so much an announcement as it is just simply an acknowledgement or a note of thanks, and that is that as we start to return to some semblance of normalcy in terms of access, I just wanted to comment that a couple of weeks ago, I know a number of us were in attendance at the season opening for the Collingwood Blues. This past weekend, my son finally, after about a year and a half, was able to participate in traveling to Penetanguishene on Sunday, but Friday night played host to Penetanguishene in minor hockey. And the comment I just would like to make is that I thought that both centers did an excellent job in terms of facilitating access to their arenas, in terms of checking for credentials, that type of thing, but ensuring that player safety was first and foremost, that spectator safety was taken into account. And so I know that, for example, on Friday night, our own staff, Harold Horner, was manning the front entrance, and it's really appreciated. And the simple system that was put in place is working. The second thing I just wanted to pass along in terms of an acknowledgement is that there's been some commentary, or quite a bit of commentary, on what disappeared, but I'd like to acknowledge what has appeared, and that is that down behind, I guess as a landmark, most people would know it as McDonald's fronting first, but the park that is directly adjacent to the Alwyn Gathering Circle, without any fanfare, staff have moved ahead with the growth and development of the parking down there. And I've just witnessed that this parking lot has now been extremely well used. And I know that we're trying to promote active transportation, people coming to the parks, et cetera, within a 15-minute radius using, perhaps a bike or foot, that type of thing. But to see the number of seniors, a couple of individuals that I witnessed with mobility issues, et cetera, who now have proper parking to a real asset within our community, and to be able to access the trails, et cetera, is a welcome addition. So thanks to staff for getting that done. It's a nice gateway to what will eventually be the completed park adjacent to the Hawley Gathering Circle. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It was certainly a very well-deserved recognition for Ed Christie. I know his family is extremely proud, and as I'm sure Ed is, wherever he is, he put a lot of time and effort into his work at the BIA and at Town Council, both here in Collingwood and in the Township of Clearview. So very well-deserved recognition. Councillor McLeod.
I'm having difficulty with my technology and I do apologize. I think I'm in the meeting now. Am I?
We can hear you, yes.
Excellent, thank you. I have two things that I want to bring up, and that they are, one is to do with the museum, and one of them is to do with, hang on while I close that. Hey, there I am. Sorry about that, I apologize. I was in at the museum the other day picking up some t-shirts for the that they have made. The back order is has arrived, just FYI, and got into a conversation about some stories that are going to be broadcast on Facebook in the next little while. They're about it's called Lore, stories unsettling the lore. And so there's ghost stories in this town, and they've recorded 4 of them. The museum workers can't prove that any of them happened, but they're telling them anyway. So if you need a bedtime story for your kids, this might be an excellent opportunity, unless they're the scaredy cat kind like I was as a kid, and they may not be a good idea. But I just thought that was such a cute idea and such a thing that needs to be told. And also, if you ordered shirts, they're in. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the Georgian Bay Reads. And as an alumnus of this very well taken in competition over the course of the years, I've been 4 times the defender of books and a 1-time winner. I would like to let everybody know that it is happening again this year. It's virtual on Saturday night, and it's free. And it is, there's 5 books that are being defended, only 2 of which I've read so far. So I have some work to do in advance of that, but I would invite everybody to get involved in that. And I also want to do a shout out to our treasurer. Treasurer Quinlan was also a winner of Georgian Bay Reads at some point a very long time ago, just like I was. I think it'll be a lot of fun. And for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's sort of like the CBC competition, where each library in our neighborhood picks a book and a person to defend it, and then they fight it out for the book that we all should be reading this fall. So those are my 2 community announcements. Thank you for indulgence regarding my technological difficulties.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And a number of us were given the opportunity to have a tour of the changes to the museum, and it is quite spectacular. It is open again for pre-booked tours, and the shirts that Councillor McLeod spoke to are the women's work, showing women who worked in the shipyards during the war, one of whom is still among us and is proudly wearing one of these shirts, I understand, as well as Get Your Ship Together shirts, which all honor the heritage of our shipbuilding. So if you're interested, certainly give the library a call and you can get in and pick up your shirts. That brings me to Councillor Comey.
No announcements tonight, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Madigan.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I appreciate the opportunity. Recently on social media, I was made aware that there are still some families in need of furniture moving into our community. So having just sold my house and been blessed enough to have extra furniture, I had the opportunity to donate some today. So if there's anybody out there that still has some, and I'm not sure if some of the other places are taking them, 2 Order of Collingwood award winners, Mark Seward, and I just know her as Mrs. Simpson. She's not Mrs. Simpson anymore. She was my public school librarian. Her first name is Sharon, and she's Mark's partner. They are still collecting for it. So I'm sure that you could contact Town Hall and they would put you in contact with them if you have any extra furniture or anything. There's still families moving to our community that are in dire need, and rather than put it to the curb, maybe donate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You took my museum announcement, so I have nothing further.
All right. Thank you. Councillor Berman.
Nothing for me tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So just a reminder, I know I've seen it on Twitter and I'm pretty sure I've seen it on Facebook as well, but the town of Collingwood is calling for nominations for the Order of Collingwood, and they're to be filed by October 29th at 4:30 p.m. And our website for the town said to be submitted electronically, but I'm pretty sure there'll be leeway if you need to do it manually and don't have capacity for an electronic submission. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Yes, and if you cannot submit it electronically, please bring it into Town Hall. And the form is available and can be picked up as well at Town Hall. Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to mention that starting tomorrow for 4 days, our Small Business Enterprise Center is holding an amazing lineup of over 20 talks for our business community. And I'm just reading from the note here. This virtual conference brings together the area's most prominent business leaders and stellar keynote speakers. Anyway, people should, if they're interested, it looks amazing. And it's the South Georgian Bay Small Business Enterprise Center, which of course is located just beside the Town Hall. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The one announcement I have tonight, thank you, Councillor Jeffrey, for covering off the Order of Collingwood, is just to congratulate my friend's house on their extremely successful Red Shoe campaign in 2021. They exceeded their target of $50,000 by raising $67,129. And we all know the important services that my friend's house provides in Collingwood and has done so since 1991. Unfortunately, since they first opened their doors, their financial burden has grown significantly. So it's extremely gratifying to see that the community has banded together to raise these funds. And just a little bit of background, my friend's house serves over 600 women and their children each year, 200 through the shelter program, and their balance through the outreach, transition, and children's programs. They provide services in Collingwood, Wasaga Beach, Creemore, Meaford, and all parts in between. So it's very good to see the community work together to make sure that my friend's house is able to provide those services, although we all work to make sure someday they won't be necessary. And with that, we will move on to the interim control bylaw updates, and I will pass it over to CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll do a quick review of the items that have changed this week. Great. And I did just want to pull up one other thing here on my desktop, pardon me. Okay. Thank you. This water capacity and land use planning policy update is provided each week per the instructions from council. Next slide, please. And the resolution from council is here on the second slide, and it talks about any updates with respect to negotiations and RFPs, et cetera. And should any of these things change, we are sure to put it in the update so council and the public are aware. Next slide, please. So the situation is that the current water supply is safe and available. And as soon as council was aware, they immediately took a proactive and transparent approach. And one of the first things that council decided on was maximizing the chlorine. So we do have several years of growth available, but not enough to get to the expected 25-26 plant expansion. So we've used an interim control bylaw to temporarily and transparently pause development and ensure that the people of Collingwood have the water that they need. And while we are in this interim control bylaw, we have been able to accept exemptions. And council was able to exempt all of the applications that were ready to go forward in 2021. And as folks in the community should know that most residential renovations and additions can continue. And if you have any questions, you can talk to the building department. And I'm going to talk a bit about the studies and interim approvals in just a minute. I did want to talk about one question I received on the street this week. Someone had asked me about the situation and whether the situation was due to inappropriate approvals or something that had gone wrong in the past. And I did want to emphasize, and I was careful to emphasize to this to the woman on the streets as well, that that is not the case. It's not about corruption or developers being given inappropriate approvals. When a development is approved, it goes through a number of different steps, often depending on whether it fits exactly with what was intended for the site. So the types of approvals that a development could go through include things like making sure it fits with the official plan, so official plan amendments, zoning bylaw amendments. It may need a draft plan of subdivision to subdivide land, to move on to a registered plan of subdivision, a site plan approval, a building approval, not to mention the permits from others such as the Conservation Authority. So many developments within Collingwood were at different stages of approval, quite appropriately in that process. And some had stalled for multiple years and restarted, while others were new. Certainly COVID and other things have motivated a lot of interest in our beautiful Collingwood. And then when you added this to our need to address the cold water treatment parameter error that our in-house engineers proactively discovered, and our maturation and transition to managing water across departments as a larger municipalities, we have used the interim control bylaw to be complete, fair, and strong in exactly what would happen consistently with every property owner and developer. So I was careful to explain that to the person that I was speaking to on the street, because I think looking back, we certainly staff would have managed things differently, but it wasn't about inappropriate approvals. We do in Collingwood have a very accountable and transparent development process where approvals are voted on publicly by the full council. And as many times as I can, I like to explain that to members of the public or anyone that wants to talk about Collingwood's development. And next slide, please. So on the water capacity side, next slide. This is about the plant itself. We're moving forward with the selection of the UV manufacturer through the evaluation and into the negotiation process. And on October 8th, we issued a pre-qualification request for proposal for general contractors. This is a really innovative process where we're trying to bring on up to 4 general contractors who might ultimately want to build our plant, hopefully will build our plant, one of them, very early, and encouraging them to be engaged in the design process so we don't have any surprises later, and that we've set things out to be very constructible. We do have still the consultant work in progress who are reviewing the chlorine, the maximum chlorine that we're adding to make sure that we've done everything we can in that area. And no other changes on this slide this week. Thank you. And next slide. Also, here's our overall large process. No changes this week, where we're working toward in the winter of 2025-2026 having expanded water capacity achieved. I will point out, it's only the second week or so, maybe the third, we've been talking about this with the council's recent approval of a potential advanced disinfection ultraviolet light, the one that we're negotiating to award right now. That work would be completed, we hope, for the winter of 2022-2023, and it would allow us to even out the summer and winter water supplies. So I'm going to show you some volumes on an upcoming slide, and I'll show you what difference that will make. Next slide. Okay, so here's a slide with the volumes, slide 7. And no changes in this week, but I'll just point out on the very bottom row. So what we have is 1,288 single development units. That's the middle column at the bottom. That's how much water we have, enough for 1,288 more single development units, or the equivalent of single homes in the summer. And in the winter, 3 rows above, 2 numbers above, 497 is a remainder that we have in the winter. So with this new UV technology implemented, we'd be able to get rid of this 497 number and move to 1,288, which will allow council to allocate a substantial amount more water. We just want to make sure that we have a strong guarantee that that water will actually be available before it is allocated. Next slide, please. And the reason we're doing the interim control bylaw is to do a land use planning policy study. Next slide. So this is the update on the study itself. During the study, there were a number of exemptions, all the ones that I mentioned that were ready to go in 2021. And it shows here in these green round circles and the purple diamonds, the ones that have been approved to go forward right now. And all of the gray squares are items where landowners or developers applied to go forward, but were not approved as an exemption, current exemption to the interim control bylaw. However, going forward, and I'll show you some dates on the next slide, please. Oh, in 2 slides ahead, I'll show you some dates. We're going to be past the interim control bylaw, we hope soon, so they'll be able to move forward under the new paradigm. So this is a slide hasn't changed, but basically if you have received an exemption, you should be able to move forward. Next slide. These were the dates that I was just mentioning, and on slide 11. And they're the same as last week. Essentially, we're now having the counselor interviews with the land use planning study consultants. And quite soon, toward the first week in November, they're going to review with staff a draft report for any technical comments, and meeting with council within the first couple of weeks to review their first version of the report. And that will bring us to a conclusion around the time we had, or at the time we had originally assumed, which was the consultant studying being done at the end of this calendar year, with some approvals and policy documents being prepared early in the new year, when we can end the interim control bylaw, we hope. Next slide, please. I think I've covered this already. Next slide, please. And the exempted projects and building permits are shown here in 2 ways, and this has not been changed since last week. We'll update it monthly or so. But basically it says in those 2 large gray circles, portions of each circle, that whether you measure by the number of building permits awarded or whether you measure by the amount of water that has been used, many of those who received exemptions to the interim control bylaw have not yet started their building work. So there's quite a bit more activity that could be happening in Collingwood in 2021 and early 2022. And I believe that's it for the update today. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, CAO Skinner. Council, are there any questions or comments on the presentation? Seeing none, I know that Councillor Berman, Councillor Hamlin, and myself met with Nick Anton and planning staff to talk about the process so far, and it was a very healthy discussion and covered a lot of useful points. So look forward to receiving the feedback from that. Clerk Alma says, properly reminded me that I left out item 3, which is declarations of pecuniary interest on the agenda. Councillor, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest tonight? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that situation as we move through the agenda, please raise it and let us know the general nature thereof. And that brings us to item 7, the consent agenda. And the resolution reads that council herein receive the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are those of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. There are 4 items on the agenda tonight. 7.1, Proclamation Dyslexia Awareness Month, October 2021. The clock tower will be illuminated red from October 18 to 20th. 7.2, Proclamation National Disability Employment Awareness Day, October 21st, 2021, and the clock tower will be illuminated blue and purple on October 21st. 7.3, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, expiry of temporary regulations limiting municipal authority to regulate construction noise. And item 7.4, FCM resolution update, Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. Can I get a mover and a seconder to receive the consent agenda? Councillor Berman and Councillor Jeffrey. I'll call for the motion to receive and then ask for items to be pulled. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Are there any items to be pulled, Council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Sorry. Yeah, 7.4, please.
All right. Are there any other items, Council? Seeing none, go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So 7.4 is simply a confirmation of what I had reported verbally with respect to the town's resolution submitted to FCM regarding the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action regarding missing children and unmarked graves. And it does confirm that they will be sending a letter to the relevant federal minister. And when they have that reply, they will ensure that that we receive a copy so we understand how it's proceeding. And they look forward to working with us and our community in representing that matter and any other that we wish to bring to their attention. So that was that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That's very good news. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, that brings us on to item 8, which is reports and minutes of other committees and boards. The resolution reads that the minutes of the following board be hereby received and the recommendations contained therein be approved. 8.1, Collingwood Public Library Board Minutes, September 23, 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Madigan. I will call the vote then. All in favor? And are there any questions arising from the minutes? Seeing none, that brings us then to 9.1, Standing Committee Reports, Strategic Initiatives, October 4, 2021 and October 6, 2021. And the resolution reads as follows. The council received the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee report from its meeting held October 4, 2021 and October 6, 2021, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. C 2021-17, 2021 Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees, and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces. And the recommendation is to defer the balance of the report and discussion to the special SIC meeting in October. PRC 2021-8, Collingwood Arts Centre Feasibility Study Report. The recommendation is to receive the Collingwood Arts Centre Feasibility Study final report and direct staff to proceed with the recommended next steps. C 2021-16, Whistleblower Policy. The recommendation is to approve a whistleblower policy. T 2021-17, Asset Management Plan Update Part 2. The recommendation is to direct staff to include the asset management plan findings in the 2022 budget process. And T 2021-18, Significant 2022 Preliminary Operating Budget Requests. And the recommendation is to direct staff to move forward with the priorities identified in the next phase of the 2022 budget process. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Doherty. And I am going to ask if there's anyone that wants to pull an item for a change in direction. And I see Clerk almost has her hand up. Go ahead, Sarah.
Certainly. Thank you, Your Worship. We do have Director Culver on the line. He just wants to provide a clarification of a correction that was made to one of the staff reports.
Okay. And this relates to the Arts Centre Feasibility Study Report, I believe. All right. Go ahead, Director Culver.
Thank you, Worship. With respect to the report, an error was caught by a member of the community. We're grateful for this correction, but on page 47 in table 11, in reference to the net operating costs assessed for year 5, The number formerly read 30,355, and it does read with correct math, $130,000 in 355, and we wanted to make sure that that significant digit was acknowledged.
Good. Thank you very much. Are there any items that council wants to pull for a change of direction? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, not a change in direction, but I do wish to speak to that same report.
Okay, what I will do is call the vote, and then I will open the floor for discussion, if that's acceptable. So we'll call the vote then to receive the report and the recommendations, and then I will open it the floor for the people to pull and comment on them. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Specifically to PRC 2021-08, Collingwood Arts Centre Feasibility Study Report. I'm not requesting a change in direction specifically this evening. I think that I may take some time to mull this over between now and our budget deliberations in early November. But I think that this is an exciting opportunity, and I think that there's an opportunity to expedite the process beyond the identified timeline within the report. I fully acknowledge that there are many moving parts to this, including the fact that I'm not aware that council's actually endorsed moving forward with something such as this, other than the financial support and the retaining of the consultant to complete the study in the first place. But the reality is that this is the third study that I'm aware that has been completed. And we either make a commitment as a community to move forward to support our arts community and the greater good, or we put this on the shelf and move on. And I'm hopeful that we will not put it on the shelf, but that we will move forward. And therefore, I would like to just put it out there for public record that between now and the budget deliberation, I hope to have an opportunity to dive further into the context of the report, to some of the moving parts within the community and the players involved, and see if we can't find a way to expedite this through a process that would see a really exciting opportunity for our community come to pass sooner than later. So that's my comment. I would like to make one other at-large comment, Mayor Saunderson, and that is that I take issue with the fact, and this is not directed at council or staff, it's directed at my colleagues in the media or friends in the media, and that is that it was reported that I was absent from the meeting on October the 6th. And I guess from a technical standpoint, that's true. But I was present on October the 4th, and I was prepared to discuss these items on the 4th. And the fact that we had an agenda that was 5 hours in length for a time slot that was allocated for 3 is not my fault. And it's happened on a couple of occasions where a member has participated in one meeting and is not given an opportunity to participate in the next meeting, simply because the length of the agenda from the outset, in my opinion, quite frankly, is too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Duly noted. Going back to your first point, though, in passing this resolution, we have endorsed and directed staff to proceed with the recommended next steps. And I'm just going to look to Director Culver, and perhaps he can outline what those steps are.
Thank you, Worship. So the next steps that we see, so as was mentioned in when the report was presented, the feasibility study was an awesome first step. It got us a long way down the path, but in terms of what needs to be built, at the end of the day, there's some work to do to really kind of dig into what feasibility means. In other words, what are the operating costs that would be acceptable to the community and to council ultimately, who's making the decision, and what kind of a facility do those operating costs represent? Where would capital funding come from? There's a lot of work to be done, and we're working at trying to develop that process for sort of finishing up what I would say is the final parts of the feasibility, which is sort of where the recommendation in the report came from and what we're hoping to accomplish in 2022.
Thank you, Director Culver. Any follow-up from anyone on council on that? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
The reason I mentioned that I'd like to dive deeper into it and then perhaps have a further conversation specific to the budget is that I'm growing concern, or I have a growing concern, and I mean no disrespect when I say this to staff, but it doesn't matter what department you talk to, there is a lot on everyone's plate. And this is a significant document that has landed on the plate or the portfolio of PRC through our direction in the hiring of the consultant. And I think that there are opportunities that we should be looking at in terms of perhaps creating external resources or ascertaining external resources that can help to expedite the process, not only in terms of the wealth of management, in terms of people who are available through the greater community, outside of the community, that can bring those resources to the conversation today, but to also maybe establish a much more aggressive timeline in terms of establishing a go-forward path. I'm speaking solely for myself when I say that this community has gone down too many paths for too many opportunities. And I think that part of the reason for some of past failings, and I'm not directing this at anyone, because in fact, I don't think that when I look at the camera, I see anyone around the table that was involved in those past events. And that is that we didn't lean heavily enough on the resources that were externally available. And I just think that if we take that opportunity, we may be able to move this forward. So I'm just saying publicly tonight that I'm supporting the or receiving of the report, that in general, I'm acknowledging the plan that's been established by the director of PRC, but that I'd really like to take a further look in terms of what's going to be presented to us right across the municipality in terms of all the needs and wants through the budget, and seeing if there's not a way that we can expedite this using external resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a follow-up to Deputy Mayor Howell's comments, I believe he is absolutely correct. And this is such an amazing opportunity for our community that if we could, through our budget process that will be coming up in the next month, look at what is necessary. And I think external resources was a good word to use, to see what's available, and if some of those resources would cost us money, if there's room for that in our budget to keep this moving. I am so aware, as we all are, of all of the things on staff's plate right now, and to do that kind of an analysis on operating costs and so on, well, it could take a while. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to look to Claire Thomas. Is there a notice of motion required in this to push this matter along through budget process, or is the comments made so far sufficient for staff?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would suggest that it would be sufficient to bring it back at the budget deliberations if we're looking at dollar figures there, and a motion would not be required at this time.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll look forward to that discussion. Moving on then to 9.2 Standing Committee Report. 9.2.1. The resolution reads that Council received the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee Report from its meeting held October 4, 2021, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. The first item has been deferred to notices of motion. And so in fact, that I think means that the entire matter 9.2.1 gets deferred then to after the notices of motion. Item 10.1 was the motion of the Deputy Mayor that he's withdrawn. And so that is removed. And that brings us then to bylaws. 11.1 delegation of authority to Assessment Review Board, education tax rate clerical error. The resolution reads that bylaw number 2021-70, being a bylaw to delegate council's function under section 359 of the Municipal Act 2001 to the Assessment Review Board, be enacted and passed this 18th day of October 2021. Get any question or mover and seconder, please? Then we can get on the floor. Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Doherty. Are there any questions or comments, council? We did receive an update from Treasurer Quinlan on this. If there's no questions, then I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And notices brings us then to notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion tonight, council? Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Is this where I would be reading in mine?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to read this in, and then I guess I'm going to ask for a vote afterwards to waive notice. So I'll read it in first, and it's pretty long, so I may have to call for a bio break in between. Whereas the global COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted workplaces for the past 17 months, and whereas the COVID vaccines continue to reduce a person's risk of contracting the virus, preventing hospitalization and death, and whereas the Public Health Agency of Canada has stated that vaccination is the leading public health prevention strategy to end the COVID-19 pandemic, therefore it be resolved that Council herein direct staff to prepare a draft mandatory vaccination policy for Council approval at its November 15th, 2021 meeting, including the following terms: that the policy will become effective November 16th, 2021, that the policy will be applicable to all members of Council, 10 of Collingwood staff, volunteer committee and board members, requiring proof of a full COVID-19 vaccination unless medically or legally exempt by January 1st, 2022. The policy will require that all applicable persons covered therein shall provide proof of, at a minimum, a first dose vaccination no later than December 1st, 2021, that the policy will require that those covered under the policy not fully vaccinated or medically or legally exempt from vaccination at any time after the effective date of this policy be required to complete mandatory training and to perform mandatory rapid antigen testing upon each admission to a municipal facility. If not fully vaccinated or medically or legally exempt before January 1st, 2022, an employee shall not be permitted to work and may be placed on an unpaid leave of absence by the CAO or designate until such time as they can provide proof of full vaccination or exemption. If not fully vaccinated or medically or legally exempt before January 1st, 2022, a council member shall not be admitted to any municipal facilities until fully vaccinated. If not fully vaccinated or medically or legally exempt before January 1st, 2022, municipal volunteers, committee members, or board members shall not be admitted to any municipal facilities until fully vaccinated. And further, that council direct staff to provide a report at its November 15th, 2021 meeting on the feasibility and any additional resources required to implement screening of proof of full COVID-19 vaccination to enter all municipal facilities. 3 more. And further, that all meetings of council, committees, boards resume the pre-COVID live settings effective January 1st, 2022. And further, that the town hall customer service reinstates service 5 days a week effective January 1st, 2022 or sooner as deemed appropriate by the CAO. And further, that all 10 employees not working from home prior to COVID return to their place of work effective January 1st, 2022 or sooner as deemed appropriate by the CAO. And then I'm going to ask for a vote to see if notice can be waived so we can discuss this and the other one at the same time.
All right, Councillor, do you want to speak to the urgency or basis for waiving notice quickly?
Quickly, yeah. Number one, I think that it does fall under the category of time sensitive because the health unit, the hospitals, the media in general are giving us updates on infection rates, vaccination rates on a daily basis. So I think that they've shown what we already know, that this is a fluid thing. And number two is that if we're going to do comparison of which option is better, the only way to do it would be to put this one on the table tonight.
All right, thank you. My understanding is that for a motion to defer waive notice, we need a 2/3 vote. There's two provisions in the procedural bylaw, and I'm going to look to the clerk to clarify, but under 2.1 rules and regulations, it says whenever we're going to depart from a normal council process, we require a majority of 2/3. And then at 4.20 notice of motion, it talks about the notice a motion shall be considered at the next regular meeting of council unless otherwise authorized by the majority of council. So I'm going to look to the clerk to make sure that we've got the correct interpretation of the rule, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did have an opportunity to review this further today because the wording, as indicated, does look a little contradictory. So we have always practiced the rule of requiring 2/3 majority vote for notice of motion. The purpose of a notice of a motion is to provide council members and the public with an opportunity to review the content of a decision before a decision is actually made by council members. So the wording, how it is provided in section 4.20 of the procedural bylaw, was primarily to address the terminology of the motion going to the next regular meeting unless otherwise provided by council. So meaning a special meeting of council meeting or a meeting that could happen in the future. So we have always practiced the 2/3 vote for any sort of waiving of the notice of motion.
Okay, thank you, Clerk Thomason. My recollection is that I have been requiring a 2/3 vote so far during this term. So I will be calling the vote and it will be a 2/3 majority. All in favor? Opposed? So that notice has been waived. Sorry, it was 5-4, so that does not get the 2/3 majority. So the notice has not been waived. We have your motion read in, Councillor Berman. And so we will be dealing with it at the next regular meeting. And then, so according to the deferral of the item that I previously read in, which is the motion relative to the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee report from its meeting held October 4, 2021. And hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. And the report is C 2021-3, mandatory vaccination disclosure policy and administrative delegation of authority. And the recommendation is to adopt the mandatory vaccination disclosure policy G-6, and further that bylaw number 2021-69 being a bylaw to amend delegated authority bylaw number 2020-59, specifically the delegation of authority for administrative policies be enacted and passed this 18th day of October 2021. I've had a request to sever that. So we will deal with the two issues separately, but I need a mover and a seconder to get this motion on the floor, please. Councillor McLeod and Councillor Doherty and Councillor Jeffrey, you've got your card up.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I would like to ensure that the mandatory vaccination policy in this report is also deferred to next week, if that wasn't implied in the rest of what we did.
The mandatory reporting vaccination disclosure policy. You're asking that this item be deferred until next week to be dealt with the motion that the Councillor Berman's notice of motion?
Yeah, that notice of motion would be moot for the next meeting if we dealt with this evening. And I have concerns with a double standard between what we expect of the public and what we expect of ourselves and our staff in terms of the differences between the notice of motion and the policy that's been proposed.
All right, thank you for that. Can I get a seconder for the motion to defer? Councillor McLeod, and there's no discussion on a deferral, so I will call the motion. All in favor? And that is carried. Opposed? Duly noted. Thank you. That brings us then to item 13, which is the county report. Deputy Mayor, do you have anything to report tonight?
I just was going to touch base because I know it's a matter of interest to the public as it relates to the waste collection. So we're approaching obviously the week of November the 1st and the first week that we will be rolling out the new cart system.
Point of order, sorry to interrupt. I do apologize. I believe we didn't deal with both parts of that severed motion. I apologize.
I had severed them, but I called them together, and I think the motion to defer was for both items. So it typically, I think we're good. I will look to the clerk. Is there any rehashing that needs to be done on that, Sarah?
My bad. I apologize. I thought they were severed prior to the other, and I do apologize.
Well, thank you. All right, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
I just was going to mention that, again, as we approach November the 1st and the rollout of the new waste cart management system, that Tuesday, so that's the 25th of October. So I have my date correct? No, I don't. So it's the 26th of October at 11 o'clock. So it's incorporated within our council and our committee of the whole meeting that was previously scheduled for that date. This is a special designed workshop specific to the issue of the cart system. And it will be, I'm sure, a lively conversation, perhaps debate among the county council as to the program itself. But the big question that many have asked is whether or not certain areas or whether residents would have an option to perhaps opt for a smaller cart. So that will be, I'm sure, the lion's share of some of the discussion that will take place Tuesday morning, as well as others. I would note that concerns that have been raised to date from those within Collingwood and elsewhere have been forwarded to the appropriate staff. So staff are fully aware of the breadth and depth of the comments that are coming from constituents, and many of those will form the basis of the conversation that will take place at the county a week Tuesday. With that, I believe Mayor Saunderson, you wanted to speak to a specific item.
I do. Councillor Doherty, does this relate to the waste carts update?
Yes, it does. Just two items. First of all, I'm very glad to hear that all of our comments from our residents in regard to these new bins has been forwarded to the county, because it's very important that they be aware of the issues that have arisen here. And I'm sure it's not only in Collingwood. Secondly, not all residents have received their new bins. I know for myself, we have not received our bins. We're on Park Road. So I'm just wondering what the timeline is to complete the distribution for the new bins.
Deputy Mayor?
My understanding is that the distribution is to be complete by the week's end. But I do know that there are pockets across the county where they're still rolling the system out. And Councillor Doherty, I'd be happy to follow up, as I did previously, specific to Park Road. The county did acknowledge instantly with a response as to why that was missed, and I'll find out exactly why they haven't circled back with the delivery, because they acknowledged that it was missed.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Comey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Deputy Mayor, I was wondering if I could just provide sort of like a gentle reminder, if you could bring forward the comment or query again about, I know you said there's lots of clever ideas for reusing the existing blue bins, but if the county does have any plans, and I think to give credit, it was Councillor Hamlin who mentioned if there is any chance of like a mass collection site or pickup option available, so we don't see sort of blue bins kicking all around the street, the original ones. So I just wanted to share that again. I think a lot of people are sort of wondering, what to do with them. Thank you very much.
I would I'd be happy to follow up. I'm confident that that will be an item of discussion on the 26th, and the comments certainly have been forwarded because they are good comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, and I did want to provide an update. As Council knows, with the provincial government's push for regional review and our governance structure, County Council also undertook to look at ways that we could streamline and find efficiencies in our service delivery. And I thought it would be an appropriate time, as I am the vice chair of that committee, to just provide an update in terms of what areas we were looking at, what's been done to date, and where it stands. So the items that were identified probably well over a year ago, probably 16 months ago, we're looking into the role of conservation authorities, fire services, land use planning, library services, stormwater management, legal services, transit, water and wastewater. And so we're looking at all of these items to find if there are ways to streamline our processes at the county and to find efficiencies with our lower tier partners. In terms of the Conservation Authority, that legislation has been under review by the provincial government. We did provide a letter to Minister Urick, as he then was, asking for some update in terms of what aspects of the mandate of conservation authorities they were looking at and whether they would be engaging lower tier municipalities and conservation authorities in that process. The province has passed legislation and has recently released the regulations. And so at this point in time, we understand that the province has created a provincial working group that consists of conservation authority staff and various stakeholders. And so that is where that is. Fire services, the county engaged a third-party consultant to look at it. It's Romax, I think is the name of the consultant. They have not yet finished their work, and it is anticipated they will be coming back to the regional review task force sometime this fall. Land use planning, county engaged Strategy Corp, and they have come back. They came back last month with their preliminary report. There are a number of recommendations in terms of how we can streamline planning processes, such as having uniform definitions for terms across the county. And so that is being discussed. No recommendation has been made by the task force to County Council. Library services, KPMG was retained to provide that report. A draft report was provided to the task force. Many questions were asked, and they're still in engagement. And I have spoken with our library CEO about it, and there are concerns there, but there has been no recommendation. In fact, it was a draft report, and the task force sent it back to KPMG for some further work. On stormwater management, it was determined in discussion with lower tier municipalities that there was no appetite to look into this issue at this time. And so while it remains open for input, the staff have recommended no action on that item. Legal services. The county does have some in-house legal services, but in discussion, it was determined that there could potentially be conflicts of interest if they provided those services to lower tier municipalities. And so that really it was probably, there was more complications there than efficiencies. And so that has been determined that there will be no more movement on that file. Transit, they have been seeking input from the lower tier municipalities, and we recently received our own transit study report, which made some recommendations in terms of the Simcoe links. So those discussions are ongoing, and nothing has been reported back to the task force, and no action has been taken there. Water and wastewater, RV Anderson was retained as a third-party consultant, and that study has not come back. It's anticipated to come back this fall. And just so people understand the financing here, all third-party consultants were retained through the province's efficiency funding. So that has not been fallen on the shoulders of the taxpayers. And so the task force is still engaged in this. No recommendations have been made to the county council at this time, and I will certainly keep you updated on the progress of those items. So are there any questions or comments, council, on that? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you for that update, Mr. Mayor. It is heartening to know that the county is having a look at how services could be streamlined and taxpayer money saved. One thing that's on my mind, and I don't know how this would mesh with the thinking of our own staff, but so many of the municipalities in Simcoe County are so far away from us. And I'm thinking Ramera on the other side of Midland, or I don't know, spring water, Severn. And as turned out in our own transit study that you just mentioned, the recommendations that came through there is that we should be looking at our immediate neighbors for joining together on some service, level. And for that purpose, I believe what was mentioned was Clearview, Town of the Blue Mountains, maybe Wasaga. And depending on how the discussions go at the county, I would just like to keep us thinking that there may be a better and more efficient way that we can organize services with municipalities that are closer to us. And I know that Town of Blue Mountains is in Grey County, of course, and that's always, how would that work? But if we're going to make it work for transit, maybe we could make it work for other things. So I just wanted to throw that out there while we were thinking of it. Thank you.
No, thank you for those comments. And you're right. The one area of that transportation loop that is covered by Simcoe Links is the Wasaga-Collingwood connection, and ultimately it goes through Clearview. But we are looking at the Nottawasaga connection as well as strengthening our ties with the Town of Blue Mountains. So those are considerations locally that will impact those discussions at the county too, I think. So if there are no other questions, I'm getting a note from Clerk Almas. It appears that I've missed a bylaw, and it's bylaw number 2072. So I'm going to read in the recommendation. And this is the transfer payment agreement investing in Canada's infrastructure program, ICIP, COVID-19 infrastructure resilience stream, local government intake. And the recommendation is that bylaw number 2021-72 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of a transfer payment agreement between Her Majesty the Queen in the right of Ontario and the Town of Collingwood be enacted and passed this 18th day of October 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Berman. Are there any questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, then I will call a vote. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you. And I believe that covers off bylaws then and the county report. So that brings us to item 14, old or deferred business. Is there any old or deferred business tonight, Council? Deputy Mayor.
I just wanted to speak very briefly to the deferral and then I guess the withdrawal of my motion tonight as it relates to the waste management car program in the county and specifically the BIA.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I had brought this forward originally with the intent of bringing it to council for consideration and support in the event that we couldn't move forward in a proactive manner with our county partner specific to the BIA. But I wanted to let everyone know that on the afternoon of October the 5th, General Manager Rob Elliott and other manager or senior members of the county staff, as well as representatives from Miller Waste, which is the new contractor that's been retained by the county, paid a visit to the town of Collingwood. Chair Conning of the BIA, as well as the general manager, Sue Nicholson, were able to join. And we did close to a 3-hour walkabout of the downtown and surveyed the intricacies and all of the pinch points that relate to how this system is going to be first implemented and secondly executed as we move beyond November 1. I think that the conversation was excellent. I think that there were some commitments from both sides to follow up with next steps as we move toward those dates. And that was the genesis for the withdrawal of the motion tonight. Thank you.
For that background and update. Is there any questions or comments, Council, on that? Seeing none, is there any other old or deferred business? Seeing none, we'll get into other business. I've got item 14.2.1, which is a Collingwood General and Marine Hospital Advisory Forum update. Is there any other business tonight, Council? I've got Councillor Hamlin and then the Deputy Mayor. Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have been asked by a few people over the weekend, and so I wanted to bring this forward. A number of us have an opportunity to chair meetings, whether it's of this council as a whole or committees. And questions of personal privilege do come up from time to time. And my question is through you to our clerk as to what are the options of the chair of the meeting if a question of personal privilege is raised.
Gomez.
Thank you, Your Worship. To address Councillor Hamlin's question, if the chair of a meeting recognizes that a breach of personal privilege has taken place, the chair shall demand that the offending member apologize, and failing such apology shall require the member to vacate the council chambers for the duration of the meeting. Obviously, since we're in an electronic forum, can request that the individual leave the meeting. And again, that question, if I can just conclude, that decision or the ruling of the chair can be appealed by the member of council. And then the question is put to the council or the board or the advisory committee, whichever it shall be, whether the decision of the chair shall be sustained.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And as a follow-up, Mr. Mayor, through you, if it transpires that the chair of the meeting doesn't see the offending behavior, what is the appropriate action at that point?
If the chair does not see the offending behavior, then I guess you can describe what transpired, and it will be up to the chair at that point in time to make a ruling. And Councillor, if your questions are relating to the incident on Thursday or at our SIC meeting, I'm going to read to you the provisions of the points of order and personal privilege. So a point of personal privilege reads, a member may rise at any time on a point of personal privilege where such member feels that his or her integrity or the integrity of the council has been impugned by another member or delegate. Upon hearing such point, the ruling of the chair shall be final unless the member appeals the ruling to council, which shall then decide upon the question without debate. A point of order is a member may interrupt the person who has the floor to raise a point of order when such member feels that there has been a deviation or departure from the rules of procedure. The ruling of the chair shall be final unless a member appeals the ruling to council, which shall then decide upon the question without debate. In the circumstances on Thursday, I found that Councillor Madigan's outburst was a point of order, not a point of personal privilege. It was a breach of decorum, and it was a breach of procedure in speaking out without being acknowledged by the chair. That was my ruling, and I admonished Chair or Councillor Madigan, and in fact, you had requested that I ask Councillor Madigan not to speak when you were speaking and to turn off his mic, which is exactly the relief I granted. So that was the ruling I made on Thursday. And as Clerk Almas has indicated, if you could have asked for clarification at that point, or you could have appealed it, in which case it would have gone to a vote of council. I hope that clarifies for you.
Well, it does. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hadn't realized that you had turned my request for a point of personal privilege into a ruling on a point of order. I'll listen more carefully next time, because on reflection, of course, I was quite angry and didn't have my rules in front of me, but I can see on reflection, and especially given the information that the clerks read to us this evening, if you had recognized it as I had asked as a point of personal privilege, there would have been no option but to ask that member to apologize or to leave the meeting. And I would have asked also for an appeal, because quite frankly, I didn't see that as a breach of our procedural bylaw, but instead I did see it exactly as an attack on my integrity. But I know you answered the question I've asked of the clerk, but I would like to ask her, if I could, through you, Mr. Mayor, because we did have a situation during the year where the chair had not observed the offending behavior and had dismissed it for that reason. And I'm just wondering if I could ask the clerk if that is the right approach, or if there's a different approach that could be taken in that circumstance.
Certainly ask the clerk on procedure, but you have to understand, Councillor, that it is the rule of the chair and you chair a committee. And so unless the council member raises it and challenges the ruling stands. And once the meeting is complete, then it is done. And that's how we function here at council. And it's very similar to the rules of civil procedure in the world of litigation. You have to take advantage of the rules and pitch your case. But once the case is heard and the meeting's over, then the matter has been dealt with.
I would like
Clerk
to ask
Amos?
my question of
Yes.
the clerk, Mr. Mayor.
I was just asking the clerk that. Clerk Amos, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. Just to point out, again, we're out right now with our procedural bylaw review, and if anybody thinks that there's mechanisms that that can be enhanced regarding this, but yes, regardless, I think one of the benefits that clerk services can provide is ensuring that during that orientation that we do with our chairs of our advisory committees or standing committees, boards, ensure that that's clearly identified on the process on what's expected regarding a ruling. But again, make sure that every member knows that they also share a right and an ability to appeal a decision of the chair. So I think that's a good lesson learned from this that we will be incorporating in our training material as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And I do note that in our very introductory meetings with council when we were at the water treatment plant, I certainly recommended to all of council members that you become very familiar with the procedural bylaw. That is how we operate around this table. I think I had two cards up. I think I start with Councillor Comey and then Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the clerk. So what is the exact phrasing that a member would need to state in such an incident?
Sarah?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. So if you believe that there is a breach of a point of order or a breach of personal privilege, the member has the ability to raise their hand to request a ruling from the chair on whether they believe that it is such. So either a point of order, so a change or a deviation or departure from the procedure, or one that's with respect to personal privilege, which is one with respect to impugning one's integrity or the integrity of council as a whole. Again, the ruling of the chair for a point of personal privilege is to, if the chair recognizes that a breach existed, demanding the offending member to apologize, and failing such apology, can ask them to remove himself from the meeting.
Hello, Councillor.
Yes, please. And through you, Mr. Mayor. So I was more interested in, you used the term appeal. So this transaction occurs, the chair says, I didn't see it, so it didn't happen. And what word would the councillor need to have at the ready? What is the particular phrase, keeping the burden on the person who is the receiver of the offense? What do they need to say to appeal? Is it, I object? Is it, I appeal?
I appeal. So the correct response, Councillor Comey, is I appeal the decision of the chair. And then at that point, generally the clerk or the recording secretary would jump in and make the statement that the decision of the chair be sustained is the actual wording. And then there's a vote on whether that decision be sustained.
So then all of council, through you, Mr. Mayor, raises their cards, or we're in person, and they can yay or nay it. And so then it's sort of a council-based decision on what occurred. So if council didn't, through you, Mr. Mayor, if council defeated the ruling of the chair, then what happens?
Sarah?
So this is again in relation to the point of personal privilege. So then the ruling would be that an apology is warranted. And if an apology was not provided, then the member would be asked to vacate the meeting. And I'll also note, I think it's important to be aware that the member that feels that their integrity has been impugned may also, any member of council may appeal the chair's decision. It doesn't have to be the member that had the point of personal privilege.
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting thing to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Comey. And in fact, we did have a challenge of a ruling. So perhaps Councillor Comey and Councillor Hamlin weren't there at that meeting, but we did have a challenge to a ruling earlier this term. Councillor McLeod, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, as well, while we're having a conversation regarding rules of procedure, bring to everyone's attention that within our towns, rules of procedure, item, I think 2.2, it mentions the fact that Robert's Rules of Order are to be consulted in situations where there may be a conflict regarding the town's particular rules of procedure. And while our rules of procedure only cite one type of personal privilege that can be called during the course of a meeting, there are many types of personal privilege contained within Robert's Rules of Order. Like, if it's too cold in the room, I would like to call it a personal privilege. Could we have the thermostat turned up, or I can't hear somebody? That's also a point of personal privilege. Point of personal privilege is not strictly and only for when someone has been impugned or feels as though they've been impugned. It's for all sorts of interesting things, and I'd highly recommend that everyone in this council read it. I get teased at my house because I read Robert's Rules to fall asleep to, but it's a charming thing to spend some time and know and be confident, so that conversations like this may not be necessary in the future.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll look to Clerk Amos. I don't know in which circumstances we would look for an expanded definition if our rule is quite defined. At what point would we look to the rules, Robert's Rules, to expand or help in a definition of something, Clerk Amos?
Certainly. So procedural bylaws, just like Robert's Rules of Procedure or Rules of Order, it's a lengthy document. So most municipalities provide reference that where your bylaw does not address a matter, that the body that should be referred to, or the resource or reference material that shall be referred to, shall be one of these governing resources on parliamentary procedures. So basically, we could make our procedural bylaw 400 pages too, but most municipalities keep them quite succinct. But being aware of parliamentary procedures is extremely important for any member of a body.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I think I had somebody else with their card up for other business. I'm sorry I've missed that. Who was next? Was there another card up? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. Earlier today, I had sent correspondence to the CAO and of course everyone on council, and it was specific to the intersection of Huron-Ontario and 4th, and we all received a detailed response as it relates to the context of a future look at this particular intersection and the potential for signals. I'm wondering if I could ask through you to perhaps the CAO or another staff member if they would like to comment for public interest how looking at signalization specific to this intersection would fit into their greater budgetary constraints and looking at what is warranted, what's not warranted. But I'd also like them to offer comment on potentially what could be done in a short-term perspective as it relates to this intersection. There was a note that the municipality is only aware of one comment. I'm certainly aware of many others. Have certainly witnessed myself the level of traffic, whether it be pedestrian, bike, our own municipal transit service, et cetera, at this particular intersection. And I would actually respectfully suggest that of the 4 signaled intersections within our core, this one is perhaps the most intricate, most complicated, and has the most parts at play. When you take into consideration there's a municipal bus stop right at the corner, you've got a variety store with a gas station that has 2 separate entrances. You have commercial enterprises that have now taken shape that weren't there. And of course, we all know that within hopefully the next couple of months to 6 months, the Monaco building will be coming on board. And I fully anticipate, and one of the selling features of that particular building was the fact that people will be able to engage in their downtown by foot. And so I can only see that it's going to become more imperative that we've got either signalization or a better system than we have today to protect the interests. I know it's not unique to Collingwood. I had sent a photo earlier of a sign in Midland, and there are two conversations to be had. And this is, I'm now sort of going off on a tangent a bit, but the one is just that I think that we should be improving our signage to begin with. The other is that I think our signage is somewhat misguided, and that is that I've never agreed from day one that the pedestrian should be the one that's yielding to the car. I'm not sure how we came up with that in the first place, but that's perhaps a conversation for a different day. But I think that's the crux of the issue, is that we don't have any means for signalization at this particular intersection, and we've left it to the individual to navigate for themselves. And as it increasingly gets busier, I would prefer to move forward with something earlier than later as it relates to putting some type of control at this intersection. So if I could have some comment, I'd appreciate it. And then I'll give some food for thought, perhaps to another meeting, in terms of bringing forward maybe some specific action through a notice of motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor or CAO Skinner, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was hoping the Deputy Mayor would ask this question this evening so that we could provide to the public the information around the question he's just articulated. I will talk to this evening as Director Slama is off today, but I did have a chance to talk with Manager Velick about our signalized intersections and our overall plans for them. I don't have any comments immediately on what can be done in the short term or the pedestrian crossing signage, so we'll have to take those away, Deputy Mayor Hull. There's quite a few things that are happening, and from a staff perspective, the overall suggestion would be that if you are concerned about this intersection, which of course you are, that you would direct staff to include this intersection in the list of intersections that we're prioritizing for new signalization warrant reviews in 2022. And I'll just take a quick step to the side. So for people who aren't traffic engineers or don't deal with intersections all the time, when you do put a traffic signal or pedestrian crossing in, there's sort of a sweet spot where it adds benefit. If you put one in where it's not warranted, it can actually increase collisions. For example, rear end collisions when people come upon others stopped at the lights, for example. So smart engineers over time have created what they call warrants, and it looks at things like traffic volumes, turning movements, collisions experienced at the intersections, and those kind of things to see if in fact a signalization is warranted. That would be the lingo. So staff do keep a list of intersections where it's worthwhile to check whether a signalization or pedestrian signals might be warranted, or where we've had a lot of public input. And engineering was able to provide me today with a few of them, intersections that are on their radar. So there's signal warrant reviews or a timing plan at Birch and First, Hurontario and 6th, Huron and Finley. We've had quite a lot of comments at Highway 26 and Cranberry Trail East, but this intersection doesn't actually meet the signalization warrant, so the criteria to put in signals at this time. And we've been looking at the crosswalk or signal warrants at High and Finley. And as part of a larger project that may need an environmental assessment first, but it's starting to proceed through the thinking and design stages. We've been looking at 6th Street and Black Ash Creek for a mid-block pedestrian signal, targeting the next year or so for that one. Ontario Street and the trains trail, we've been looking at the crosswalk there as part of the Minnesota storm sewer replacement, but it's a year to 2 years out. and also looking at a mid-block pedestrian signal at Mountain Road and Black Ash Creek. So on the Huron-Ontario corridor, there's quite a few places where there could also be signals installed potentially, or at least where warrants may need to be checked. And engineering provided a number of intersections. And I know Deputy Mayor Hall, you'd compared a few of them in your preamble, but I will mention 5th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and Fair Street. And we don't know without going through the exercise whether signals are warranted at these locations. One thing at 4th and Huron-Ontario, typically under the town standards, we wouldn't install a pedestrian crossing here because it's within 200 meters, 160 meters actually, of the pedestrian crossing that's right in front of the Monaco building there at the lights at Hume and Huron-Ontario. So within the next year, and within that long list, we will go through warrants in 1 or 2 more locations. So the first thing that engineering staff would do is a triage of all the available, potential locations where we need to do a warrant study to figure out which are the ones that seem the best to proceed to that stage with. And then in the next master transportation study, which is currently scheduled for 2024, we look at a broader swath of town and potentially doing sort of a broad application of warrants so we could get a priority list for actions. So I think that's the technical detail-filled response today to your question. But I think it's good to put this on staff's radar. And technically, our recommendation would be that you draw this to staff's attention, and we will triage it with the other locations so we can figure out where we can get the most benefit for council's investments in signalization. Thank you.
Follow-up, Councillor or Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I guess I do have a couple of questions. I mean, number one, it's clear that from the correspondence as well as from your response that we've got a number of priorities. All of these priorities come with a cost. So I say this with tongue in cheek, but serious at the same time, and that is that the simple solution to start would be to simply drop the speed limit to 40 kilometers municipally and use that as the launching pad to signal to the community that we're serious about traffic calming measures. But I take your point specific to this particular intersection. I think that, as I said, what I sort of struggle with purely from an anecdotal standpoint when I observe this particular intersection is that when you compare it to, say, 2nd and Simcoe in Huron-Ontario, you literally have 4 fixed objects in 4 fixed buildings, where this is a unique intersection in the sense that you've got these moving parts with a transit stop. You've got 2 in-out points for the service center, and there's no other place that I can think of where you've got somebody who potentially is coming north on Ontario, makes a left-hand turn, and literally just glides right into the parking lot at the convenience store without any regard for who may be coming along from a pedestrian or cycling standpoint, because it's an open intersection and it doesn't have the 4 fixed features that I mentioned. But I guess the one question I'd like to know is that when you refer to the term warrants, who establishes the warrants, and what ability does a council, any council, have to go above and beyond and maybe put in measures that exceed what the base would warrant for the installation of a fixture, this place or any other?
CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Deputy Mayor Hall. In Ontario, the Ministry of Transportation establishes the warrants. And when you look at going above and beyond, you have to look at whether what you're doing will actually be better for traffic and better for people, or potentially not better for people. And there's quite a lot of research available on, for example, putting stop signs in where stop signs are not warranted, and the the potential for collision, rear collisions, same things in sets of signals. So we work with the expectations of the public, on the thousands of people, and to figure out what's the best way to move forward. Ultimately, within the town and with the full advice of your engineers, council can make a decision to move forward with what you see best for this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Last word, Deputy Mayor, if you have a comment here.
I appreciate those comments, and I don't disagree. In fact, I would agree full-heartedly that the installation of signals or stop signs is not the be end and end all, and in fact can cause issues. And that's why I think that I would very much like to see our community progressively move forward and start to emulate some of the other communities that, quite frankly, in my opinion, are setting a much higher standard as it relates to the pyramid being putting the pedestrian first, cyclists and those others, second, municipal transportation, and the vehicle last and very far down the list. And I'm just hoping that perhaps, and this will be my last word, that perhaps as we look at the budget for 2022, we will really take a hard look as a council in our final year and say, what are the things that we could do to establish some guiding principles so that our last year is a success, but that the next council that comes forward, hopefully with the same sort of opinion or lens to the importance of this issue, will really start to take a progressive issue and really challenge the status quo, really challenge these standards that have been established by the MTO, because to be honest, they're not a gold standard, they're a base. And any opportunity that we can excel and create a better opportunity, I think we should be. And when I look around and I see municipalities elsewhere throughout the province, and we see this when we attend AMO conferences, we see this when we get information that comes through, the Good Roads Association, et cetera. There are so many progressive things that are happening elsewhere that I just, we talk about Collingwood as this, the Mecca to live, work, and play. Well, it's maybe time that we started investing a little bit of money and really, embrace some of these two things so that we ensure that those who do want to live, work, and play here can do, collaboratively in a safe fashion. 40 kilometers, in my opinion, is the starting point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CAO, or perhaps to whoever is representing Public Works this afternoon. What is the speed limit right there at 4th and here, Ontario, currently?
CAO?
It's 40 kilometers an hour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to the CAO, who's sort of covering off Public Works, I'm wondering if you could kindly sort of relay this message. It's under the theme of traffic calming. I had an exchange with Director Slama, and she happened to mention, oh, by the way, we're taking out, all the traffic calming around the schools with snow removal planning coming. So I just share the thought that I imagine our residents are going to be like, oh, that's really too bad, because it was so well received and welcomed. So I hope some thought is being given to some, perhaps in conjunction with Executive Director Pate, some messaging, some reminders, some discussion, maybe, through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Jeffrey, the Police Services Board being re-engaged to say, this traffic calming has come down. How can we keep this focused, because we're not immediately going to have this super heavy snow to rely on that's going to slow everybody down intuitively. So I'm anticipating that that same group of active transportation advocates sending a lot of emails saying, where did this go and what is our plan? So it's just a comment that I hope you can pass along, and I hope to start to see a plan in place for, when we take it out through to next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to go to Councillor Doherty. Deputy Mayor, I've been talking a lot on this topic, but I'll go to you for last word. Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just really want to echo the Deputy Mayor's comments in regard to this council driving toward no pun intended, a proactive policy when it comes to putting pedestrians first, putting active transportation up there, and vehicles last. So if that comes down to design issues, road design issues, intersection issues, there are other municipalities who are not necessarily following the MTO regs to a T. And I can think of Oakville right now. I can think of points along the way, County Road 21 between Orangeville and Georgetown, because it is a route that I travel frequently. And they are, as an example, dropping speed limits down to 40 and even 30 along a county road. So, the rules can be bent according to the needs of the community. Also, just through you to Councillor Comey, I did ask last week of Director Slama if we could delay the removal of those traffic calming measures in front of our schools for as long as possible so that our residents get used to them, because like you, I have heard so many positive remarks about those traffic calming measures that were put in place. And it's just a shame that we have to take them out, so very soon after they were installed. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for your deference, Mayor. I just wanted to echo some of the remarks that have already been made.
Thank you, Councillor. Did you have your card up, Sonia?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was debating. I just did want to clarify that the question about warrants was about the warrant for a traffic signal, which is a legal MTO warrant. It's a different situation in a number of the other things, like, for example, speed limits within local municipalities are not an MTO reg. So that was just a very specific response. And I did want to say that I think Collingwood is doing very well. Obviously, we can do better. We have a great trail system. We have a cycling plan. We have an active transportation plan. We have a traffic calming policy. We got traffic calming out temporarily, but in year when council asked for it. So I think we're all of the same mind. We embrace the values here in this community from a staff perspective and from a council perspective. And I know sometimes we can't all work as quickly as we'd like to together, because once you sit down as staff sometimes and look at that long list of needs. But I just wanted to encourage council to continue to articulate the things that are valuable to you, and to know that staff are on, of the same mind generally, that we want to move toward a town that's great for people, and that we're listening to the conversation. And I think that while some municipalities may be doing better in some areas overall, I think we've all been leading our community in the right direction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, CAO. I'll give a brief last word to Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. I want to thank Councillor MacLeod for bringing up the question with regards to here in Ontario, but I think we're coming from two different points of view. There's two things to speak to that issue. One is that council implemented a policy that allowed for the expansion of patios. And as a result of doing that, staff recognized that perhaps reducing the speed was not a bad thing to do. So I applaud them for doing that without any fanfare. They just went ahead and did it, to the best of my knowledge. And it speaks to why we can't maybe champion some of these things elsewhere. And I'll circle back to that in a second. But the other, it speaks to the inconsistencies. So you have a 40 within the downtown, but technically the feeding streets coming into that still remain at a different speed limit. And I think that was part of the conversation from a macro perspective, is that this community, whether it be the 10th concession, whether it be the various feeder streets going in, we have a multitude of speed limits within our community versus, say, our neighbors to the east in Wasaga Beach, where it's clear when you're entering their community is a 50-kilometer zone throughout, unless otherwise posted. And I just think that it would be a good thing to be looking at reducing the speed, and two, to be providing continuity. And the second is that I do take a bit of issue with the last comment regarding some things that have been championed within this community. The CAO was absolutely correct. We have a first-class trail system, a system that continues to evolve and get better. However, I think throughout the balance of this term, for the majority of this term, Councillors Hamlin, Comey, and Doherty have been speaking to the issues of community safety, the environment, etc. And I don't take any personal privilege in saying this, but quite frankly, the items on Finley Street and the items on Peel Street and the items in front of the community schools would not have been put in place if the hand was not forced. They were not proactive measures that were taken and implemented by staff. They were shoved by council. Thank you.
All right. I think we've exhausted this topic, and there's lots more to be dealt with on this issue moving forward. So we'll move on from that now. That brings us to item 14.2.1, Collingwood General Marine Hospital Advisory Forum Update. And I want to just advise council that on September 27 this year, we met with the hospital board, CEO, Nora Holder, Dave Johnson, who is the board vice chair, Mike Lacroix, who's VP of Financial Services, and Leslie Paul, who is the board chair, their communications officer, Joy Pritchard-Kerr, who is the foundation CEO. Lisa Van Kosten is the communications chair. We had the mayors and CAOs of the catchment area that the hospital serves, being Wasaga Beach, Town of Blue Mountains, Grey Highlands, Clearview Township, and Collingwood. And they provided an update, obviously dealing with the good news they received this last August of the $15 million injection into their redevelopment process for the design and planning of the new hospital. As well, what got lost a bit in the announcement was the fact that for the third year in a row, their operating budget was increased, which clearly recognizes the importance of the hospital to our region. They asked for municipal updates from each of the local mayors and CEOs. And from the town of Collingwood, we certainly advise that we continue to be supportive of the process, and that we were happy to be part of the stage one announcement. We indicated that we had put $2 million aside towards a hospital redevelopment reserve from the asset sale proceeds, and that we are also participating in the joint municipal physician recruitment committee. We also noted that hospital is receiving $20 million from the county's Hospital Alliance group, which has put $3 million aside for the 6 hospitals in Simcoe County over 15 years, totaling $45 million. So that's almost half of that amount going to the Collingwood Marine Hospital if it proceeds with the development as proposed. And we clarified for the hospital that we foresee no issues with the water capacity constraints, given that the hospital will not likely be built before 2025-26. And as well, we are working on ways to mitigate the issues as we get reported on weekly. So it was a productive meeting, and we will be meeting periodically, probably 3 or 4 times a year. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those. Seeing none, that brings us then to item 15, which is the in-camera item. And the resolution reads, whereas the clerk hereby concurs the reasons for the in-camera session have been duly reviewed and considered, and the matters are authorized under the exception provisions to conduct a closed session in accordance with the Municipal Act prior to proceeding in the closed session. Therefore, be it resolved that this council proceeds in camera in order to address a matter pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual, including town or local board employees, item A, and the receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that person, also item A. And there's only one item on the agenda, and that is the CJI follow-up. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Berman. Any questions or comments, council, before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. And so we will reconvene. It's now 6:48. We'll reconvene at 7 o'clock in camera. I'll just look to the clerk. We're using the same link. Yes, so it'll be the same link. So I will see everyone in 12 minutes. Thank you.
Excuse me, Your Worship, you're live again.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I will look for a motion to rise from in camera and resume open session at 7:40 p.m. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Doherty and Councillor Madigan, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And that brings us to our confirmatory bylaw, item 16.1, and resolution reads that bylaw number 2021-71 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of council held October 18, 2021 be enacted and passed this 18th day of October 2021. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Berman, Councillor Doherty, all in favor? That is carried unanimously, and we will be looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Jeffrey, thank you very much. Thank you, council. It's been a busy meeting and we got a lot done. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you and good night, everyone.